Teachers of Reddit, what was the worst thing you had to confiscate from a student? Story 1. The weirdest one was definitely the fish in a vase they found during locker checks. It was in an unassigned locker that someone had added a lock to. Inside was a live betta fish in about as large a vase as you can fit in a locker, fully decorated. Someone had clipped a little book light to the top of the vase, presumably so the fish wasn't in the dark all the time. No one claimed to know whose it was or how long it had been there, so it lived in the coach's office for at least that year. Story 2. When I was in 5th grade, there was an active market in live bees. Some kids figured out that the weight of the average 5th grader, briefly stepping on a bee, in the grass, would stun it for about a minute without actually killing it. They started going out in teams to scout bees on the field, stun them, and carefully scoop them into plastic sandwich bags. They'd then sell them to other students who'd release them in classrooms to waste class time and scare people. You could get honeybees for 25 cents apiece, bumblebees and yellow jackets cost more. Teachers and school admins started cracking down on this, and teachers literally confiscated live bees in plastic bags from students when found. And they eventually had to start having someone watch the field to catch students in the act. You can't help but be impressed by the creativity and entrepreneurial spirit of these 5th graders. Of all the things that they could try and sell to their fellow classmates, they actually settled on live insects. I also feel like 25 cents a bee is way too cheap. Just think of the work that went into that operation, including the risk of being stung. They should be selling those for at least $5 a piece. I bet at least that the teachers will laugh about it when they're retired, like, hey, remember that time our students became bee dealers and beekeepers? Story 3. My beyond innocent sister was sent to the principal's office for bringing an adult toy to school and making an obscene joke and gesture with it to her teacher. What actually happened was she was drinking those weird protein shots to bulk up for cheerleading or something we'd gotten from Costco, which came in a long, pink, fairly phallic tubes. Kind of like that. When her teacher got mad and was like, "What is this?" my sister honestly said, "It's a protein shot," and gestured to drink it. Story 4. I taught 1st grade and confiscated a piece of a broken beer bottle from a 6-year-old. It really surprised me because he was the sweetest kid. Turns out another classmate asked him to bring a weapon and hide it in the playground sand so that he could get back at another kid. I tried to do more life lesson things than suspension for both boys because they're freaking 6. But school policy had them both suspended for a few days. Story 5. Not a teacher, but I watched quite a funny confiscation while in detention as a sophomore in high school. I was reading a book just trying to make the time go by when our vice principal, who was monitoring detention that day, stepped out for a moment. All of a sudden, I hear a cracking sound and I look up from my book to see a broken egg on the floor. The few kids in the room look around at each other confused, and nobody owns up to it. And nobody knows who did it because we were all distracted when it happened. The vice principal returns, doesn't notice the egg, but he's so engrossed in his paperwork that this kid still gets away with throwing another egg. Everyone looks up, and the VP asks what that noise was. And this kid holds up a broken pencil and apologizes. Everyone goes back to minding their business, but all the students now know who the culprit is. Finally, this kid throws one last egg, but unfortunately the VP looked up from his papers just as he threw it. He walked over to the kid's desk, asked him what he was doing, and the kid goes, "Just cracking jokes." The VP holds out his hand and the kid reveals an entire carton of eggs from under his sweatshirt and hands it to him. The VP looks so unfazed that I honestly wondered what else that man has seen. I was honestly glad I got detention that day. If the vice principal was on his game, he would have responded back with, "Doesn't seem like you're cracking jokes. Looks more like you're cracking yolks. Now hand over the contraband, Humpty Dumpty." It's a bold move to bring a chicken projectile to detention and act in such a way that will likely just lead to more detention. But I guess that's just how some kids are. In perpetual detention. In the comments, did anyone go to school with that one kid who always seemed to be in detention? And what did they do? Story 6. Not a teacher, but this is the worst thing I had confiscated. It was 1984 and I was 9 years old. Back then it was common for parents to buy loads of fireworks for November 5th in Britain, Guy Fawkes Night. I got a load of them on around November 1st and emptied them into a cardboard toilet roll that I'd sealed up at one end. Made a fuse from blue touch paper and tucked it in, and then used masking tape to seal the top. I was 9 years old. I took it to school and was showing a kid in class during a lesson. The teacher, a guy in his 60s, saw I was distracting people, so he called me up and asked me what it was. I explained, and he confiscated it. At the end of the day, he called me over, told me not to bring things like that into school, and then gave it back to me. And that was the end of the matter until I set it off a few days later and it set fire to a hedge. Kids, the 80s really were a different time. Story 7. I worked as a middle school language teacher, and every kid in class is assigned a Chromebook, and we are encouraged to have the kids work on them. I let them sit together to encourage them to help each other out while they do some work on their devices. I see 2 kids at the back of the class giggling and just watching the screen. No reading or writing happening. I get up slowly, watch them panic, and start frantically clicking the mouse so as to close up the windows that weren't supposed to be open. I get to them and ask them what's so funny. One of the kids says something about emails as I take the Chromebook from his desk. Now, the only open tab is in fact the email. I sit down at a free desk close to his and I use a trick that I had just learned, which was to reopen tabs that had been recently closed. 1, twice, 3rd time's the charm, full-on P&V adult video on screen. They found a way to bypass the school board's security and were watching adult films in class. So I guess the confiscation of a Chromebook isn't exactly the worst as opposed to what was on the Chromebook. Story 8. I didn't confiscate anything, but this is a good story nonetheless. One of my high school students, grade 10, so about 16 years old, walked into class and threw his school bag down on the ground beside his desk. About 20 minutes later, as I'm teaching, I smell beer. I called the student who threw his bag down on the ground over to my desk and took him outside to the hall. He told me that he has a 6-pack of beer in his bag for a party after school, and it broke when he threw his bag down. I told him to go and remove his bag and clean up the mess with paper towel. I didn't involve admin, call his parents, and the students didn't notice. He got rid of the bag, cleaned up the mess quietly and calmly, and we all moved on our day like nothing happened. Sometimes kids just make bad mistakes, and I could tell that this kid was terrified about the consequences. Story 9. Not me, but a colleague had a kid in his class who would regularly drink alcohol in class. His parents would buy it for him. And while he was confiscating a bottle from his school bag, he found a set of homemade obscene comics the kid had drawn. They were equal measures of horrifying and hilarious. Surreal adult stuff, including teachers, classmates, and random other people he knew. I just remember one of flying jumbo jet phalluses making emergency landings in various people. The comics were added to a collection of dumb stuff kids would draw, and no one made a big deal out of it. Story 10. Not a teacher, but in 7th grade, I got caught with a knife. I didn't realize that I had it until I was on the bus, and I'd worn this pair of jeans to walk to my buddy's house up the road on Sunday and had my little pocket knife in my pocket. I have an uncle who has always been a whittler or carver and makes really impressive stuff, and I'd gotten a small knife and was trying to learn also. Anyway, Monday morning, I got up and just threw those same jeans on and hurried to the bus stop. Realized my pocket knife was still in my pocket about halfway to school. In second period, which was gym, I told my buddy that I'd accidentally brought my pocket knife to school. I didn't know what to do with it. He thought I was messing with him, so he yelled to the coach that I said that I had a knife. She patted me down and found it. Straight to jail. Had to wait there for my parents to come pick me up. And I got kicked out of school for a month. Didn't have to do any schoolwork during that time, and missing a month of assignments and homework didn't count against me. But the boredom of staying home alone every day, watching The Price is Right and soap operas was torture. Cool story. Probably didn't go down that way. Does anybody else agree? On the one hand, kids in 7th grade don't go to jail. At least, not for what happened here. I could see the misunderstanding led to the police getting called, but it would take all of 10 seconds to explain to them why you accidentally brought a knife to school. And then, I assume all the other kids would be like, yeah, he never took out the knife or threatened anyone. Case closed. And then, we are led to believe that you would get kicked out of school for a month for all of this? Unlikely. Story 11. I'm not a teacher, but once I had my backpack confiscated because someone said the weird kid had put something in it. I thought they were calling me weird and I got a little annoyed. And it turns out the weird kid was trying to steal my snacks. Another time, some kid tried putting a knife in my backpack. I would have gone to jail if the cameras hadn't picked up what was happening, and the fact that he did it while surrounded by a hallway full of people. I have no idea why people would always mess with me. I guess it's because they thought I was special needs. The icing on the cake is when I got a useless teacher fired for harassment. He kept telling me to put my phone away. I had a doctor's note that I need to keep it on me in case of a medical emergency. I had diabetes, so a lot of rules got bent. The guy took my phone out of the pocket and then got into my locker and just went through my things without the principal's approval. Took some of my stuff and then didn't report it. A Game Boy that I had bought off Amazon, my wallet disappeared, but that was probably another student because he left the door open. A couple days later, I was in the lunchroom and he comes up to me questioning me like I'm a convict, and then grabs my insulin pump out of my hands. While he's looking at it, I'm sitting there wondering, WTF? And thinking of ways to mess with this guy. Turns out I didn't have to do anything as he walked off with it still attached to me. I got up to follow as I didn't want it to get ripped out, and he turned around and saw my deadpan expression and immediately said I was going to try and stab him. Apparently he thought I was crazy. Nope, but I did point to my pump with my hands. The jerk put on a smug face and just yanked it. In doing so, he pulled out the cord. I wasn't surgically implanted, but it did hurt and started bleeding when he did. The nurse saw this and then went off on him, and while some of the students called the cops, dude got fired right then and there, and I got to chill out at home for a few days. Story 12. So I'm not a teacher, but Halo. I was in high school and someone or a rogue band of someones had figured out a way to load a Halo emulator onto the school-wide network drive. Obviously, the higher-ups of the school didn't like this one bit and took it down. And this began a war that ultimately was won by whomever loved Halo enough to share it with the world. It went weeks of back and forth, and the IT department was so annoyed with it that we came back from summer break and they had completely revamped the school's network. There was a supposed file locker that only the highest of highs could make changes, and it was there where the beloved folder lay to support Halo. Now, I'm not tech savvy, so I don't understand, but somehow this was also touted as a way for the entire school district to have easy access to materials. This meant, of course, it was only a matter of time until the Halo popped up in a super secret private folder and it was playable again. For reference, my district at the time of going to high school was back in 2015, had like 12 high schools. Absolutely massive. Now, in the end, the IT department for the district waved the white flag, and I think Halo is still on the district network. Story 13. Not a teacher, but in 4th grade I lived in a small town in Nebraska. There wasn't much to do other than to ride bikes around with your friends and find trouble. No idea why I did this, but we had garden snakes that we would try to catch, and we tried to keep them as pets in an ice chest. The one that I had apparently passed out, and I figured it was just sleeping. I placed it in a gallon Ziploc bag, poked some holes in it, and put some grass in it. I thought garden snakes ate grass. I put it in my backpack and took it to school to show my friends my pet snake. Well, a teacher caught me pulling the bag out of my backpack and freaked out. I didn't get in too much trouble other than my parents getting called, but I figured if that teacher were to see this Reddit post, that they would say they confiscated a dead snake from an odd 4th grader. Now, I was kind of hoping that the plot twist of the story was that the snake was only stunned from the cold and then came back to life in the classroom and caused a mass panic or something. These kids could have also embraced the mindset of the kids from the other story and captured snakes and then sold them to other students. Not sure how much of a market there would be for serpents, but you have to start somewhere. Story 14. Teen girl's phone. The phone itself was pretty normal, but it was what was on it. She was sitting at a desk with some boys crowded around her phone, all of them laughing, and I caught sight of some girl's inappropriate pictures on it. Not the girl who owned the phone, I didn't get a good look, but it was quite a large girl in the pic. Don't know who it actually was or how she got these inappropriate images, but it had been getting shown around a lot. I felt terrible for the girl in them. She shouldn't have taken those pics, but she didn't deserve to have them shown around and laughed at. Also, this was my first week working in a high school, and the girl with the phone then got suspended for threatening to follow me to my car and attack me because her phone got confiscated. Story 15. Not the worst, but definitely my favorite. I taught 4th graders and saw a couple of them passing around a sheet of paper to each other instead of doing what they were supposed to be doing. I took the note from them, and one of the kids' faces looked as if her life was over, and she started crying and begged me not to look at it. I unfolded it to see what they were writing about. The note was filled with drawings of cartoon butts, and they told me they wanted to have a contest to see who was the best at drawing butts. Story 16. Not a teacher, but the student who got the item confiscated. It's nothing crazy or anything, but back in 8th grade, we had an arms race for paper hornets. Now, paper hornets are pieces of paper folded as many times on itself as possible, and then compressed to a V shape. We'd use these in combination with elastics and then shoot them at each other. Now, anybody can make a paper hornet, it's not hard, but it isn't easy to make a great one. I, however, made, and still can make, very, very hard paper hornets. Basically, a chunk of wood flying at you at Mach 3. Now, because of this, many people would ask me to make them paper hornets. They'd pay me in gum, gummy snacks, Dunkaroos, etc. The better the payment, and the more time that I invest in the project. So near the end of this war, getting caught shooting paper hornets would result in missing recess. It eventually escalated to suspension, but thankfully I dropped out of the race just before that. People started adding staples to the ends to draw blood or increase hardness, so I dropped out. Anyways, my friend, Max, that's a fake name, wanted an order of like 20. Gave me 6 packs of fruit gummies as payment, and I proceeded to get to work. These were the hardest ones I've ever made. They were reinforced with paper clips so they wouldn't lose their shape and everything. Like I said before, he wasn't my only client, so as I was making them in my desk, I caught the teacher's attention. He asked what I was doing, and I said, nothing. He came over, and I shoved the current hornet I was working on in my desk. He asks again, and I say, nothing, and raise my hands. To which he grabs the lip of my desk and lifts it to reveal around 150 different paper hornets. Thick, thin, reinforced, regular, etc. There was no escaping it now. He sent me to the office and confiscated all of them. The arms race was over. Anyone caught with a paper hornet would be suspended, and anyone seen with an elastic band had their desk searched. All because of these little pieces of paper. Not gonna lie, I miss that. If I were a betting man, I would wager that this kid grew up to be very successful in business somehow. I mean, to plan and coordinate such an operation while meeting supply and demand needs is quite impressive to say the least. He probably learned more about life, business, and people doing this little business than he did in any of his other classes. In the comments, has anyone else had a valuable life lesson from school which had nothing to do with their classes?